Alright, welcome to part 2 of the SuperATV Upgrade Spectacular. In the last episode, part 1, we took the suspension down on the rear and then put the new arms in and the Rhino 2.0 axles in the back. Put the beginnings of the portals on, put the mounting plate for the portal itself on the end of the arms, just to kind of tie the arms together and finish them up. Today, part 2, I believe I'm going to do tie rods on the front. And the reason for that is I kind of want each part of this video series to be its own individual part. I don't want to bundle parts together, like I don't want to do the front arms and the tie rods in just a single video. It just makes it a little more confusing doing it that way. So I think it'd be better to try to separate it. But another thing is, while you can do the tie rods just fine with all the arms on there, they're definitely easier to change out with the arms out of the way. So what we're going to do in this video is tear down the front and then remove the tie rods and put the new tie rods on. And then in part 3 we'll do the front arms and then the mounting plates for the portals on the front to finish tying that together. Then we'll be able to move on to the portals for their own video. I'll probably do a front and rear separate. We'll just kind of see how it goes on time. But yeah, it's early morning. I was hoping for a nice pretty day today, but it's actually rainy and gross outside. So for now, I'm just going to leave that door closed because the wind is blowing right in and bringing the rain with it. So I'm gonna leave it closed for now. We might open it up a little later. Hopefully see some sunshine peeking out, but we'll see. Anyway, let's get back to taking all this apart. We'll go ahead and remove the caliper as usual. And just like before, the front side on my razor here has been apart recently, so I didn't go in and torque everything down. It's just tightened down with this little 1/4 inch impact drive, which puts out about 35 foot-pounds, so just enough to hold the machine together and so I can move it around while I was getting set up for this series. The little top bolt here should have a thread locker on it. Just set it up there, and then there's one on the bottom. These are easier to get, much easier to get to than the back ones. I got kind of a build-up of thread locker in there now because I've had these off so many times over the years. But it ain't gonna hurt nothing. Just has 2 bolts and you can wiggle the caliper free. But I'm gonna take the big Mr. Screwdriver here and pry these factory clips loose. Now the portal kit comes with new longer brake lines, so I'm going to be replacing these. I'm not too concerned about saving them at this point, but there's no reason to just damage them on purpose. So yeah, I'm just going to take it loose and then tuck that out of the way. Just let that caliper rest down there. I'm all stuffy this morning. I'm all stuffy, and I've only got one ear working. My right ear's got fluid in it this morning from allergies. I can hear it in my voice too. And it's a little cooler this morning. It ain't quite time for the long pants, but it is a little chilly. It's supposed to warm up this afternoon, so we're going to take our 1 1/16 here and remove this axle nut. There's yours should have a Carter pin in it. Now that axle nut should have quite a bit of torque on it. If it does not, then you're using the old style cone washers, and watch part 1, and I've covered that in depth. But as you can see, I don't have a cone washer. I got a nice heavy one that I use, and that took care of my wheel bearing problems. Alright, that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and remove the tie rod. That'll give us better access to the pinch bolts for the ball joints to get them loose. On this one, it's an 18 millimeter, and I do not have a quarter pin in there. It has a nylon nut on it, so if you have one, obviously just remove the quarter pin, but all you have to do is back this nut out. And that ball joint on the end of the tie rod very likely will not want to come out just by hand, so I'm just going to take a little ball peen hammer here and just tap on that ear while I pull up on the arm, or yeah, on the tie rod, I mean. That'll convince it to come loose. It's the best way to do it. Alright, so now we're just going to remove these pinch bolts, and that'll let the front knuckle here separate from the arms. These are 15 millimeter, just like most everything else. Go ahead and just loosen the top and then the bottom, and then we'll take them out. And also, when you take these bolts out, check them to make sure that it doesn't have like worn spots right through here in the center. If it is worn, then you'll probably have wear on the stud of the ball joint itself, so you may need to go ahead and think about replacing those. The front arms from Super, you had the option to actually include ball joints with them, which I did. So I'm replacing the ball joints anyway with much better upgraded ones that are serviceable. Alright, pull the bottom one. Just keep everything kind of together. Left works as a good kind of secondary work table under there. I like it. I like it a lot. Alright, so the shock's still attached and it's loose. I haven't got these bolts tightened up either. But we have to get these ball joints to let go of the arms. So I'm going to take my dead blow here, and this shouldn't mar the finish on your arms because of, you know, the soft surface. I'm just going to tap on that lower arm while I kind of move this around and pull up on it. And down it comes. Just kind of push it down a little out of the way. And then this one's about ready to fall out, but again, just tap on the top of this knuckle. And do not use a regular hammer, because you could really damage both of these parts by beating on it with a normal hammer. Alright, so for the portal kit, this is not going to be reused. I'm going to set it over here with the parts that are going in storage. Very likely where they will stay. Alright, so before we pull the axle out, we go ahead and take the shock loose and get this front arm out of the way. It'll just be easier. So remove this bottom shock bolt, 15 millimeter again. Alright, so if you're not doing anything else with your shocks, you don't have to take it loose from the top. You can just wiggle the arm and pull the bolt out and just take the shock, pull it up here, take a rope or something or a strap, tie it up out of the way. But do watch your noggin, because you could easily headbutt that joker. But I'm gonna go ahead and remove the shock because I have a replacement stick that I put in here that's cut to the right length where my razor sits at normal ride height to put back in. That way I'm reassembling everything at normal ride height versus full droop, so everything kind of lines up just a little bit better. It's a little more snug up in here. It is possible to get power tools in there if you finagle it just right, but this would be a good place for an air ratchet, and I have one. I'm going to go get it. Air ratchets are very nice for situations like this, but the only problem is these things are excessively noisy. But it's still going to save me a lot of... Okay, Mr. recently rebuilt shock therapy shock is out of the way. Now we'll go ahead and get the upper arm out of the way. One little bolt here. There's a bolt up here, and it can be a little difficult to get to with this front fascia on the machine. I do apologize about my stuffiness. It hopefully will clear up as the morning goes on. But instead of removing this entire thing, all you really have to do is remove these lower 4 bolts. I'm using a T40 Torx. And just pull these out. Once those are out, then this will flex enough where you can get the bolt right there. Now if yours are turned around the other way, so they're coming in from the front, I don't think you'd be able to tweak this enough without risking breaking it or cracking it to get that out. You may end up having to take the rest of it off. There's just another T40 here and here, and then right under the hood right here on both sides. It's pretty simple to get off. Make sure you unplug your headlight bulbs, or even just twist the bulb and take it out of the housing. All right, now that'll give me enough flex in that front fascia to reach in there. Put my 15mm wrench on that nut, and then we'll just take this bolt out. All right, this little front bolt on this side of the arm. Make sure you keep up with your washers. As I've mentioned before, I don't specifically know why they put washers on these things, because these flange nuts are exactly the same size as the washer, so I'm not sure the washer's necessary, but it's not going to hurt anything either, so just keep using them. That's the factory front arm. It's never been replaced. It's still the one from 2015. I do have aftermarket bushings in it. This one, as you can see, has got some wear in there. But I mean, that's to be expected because you can't grease this into the arm. It's just so small. It doesn't even really have a place for a fitting. You might could get one in there, I don't know, but nobody ever does, I don't believe. All right, put that bolt back together, set it out of the way. Kind of in little groupings, make it easier to know what's what. Now we're gonna pull this front axle. Now, this is the way axles are supposed to come out. I talked about that in the previous videos, but you're supposed to just be able to do that, and out she comes. And if you keep it cleaned and greasy splines and just proper maintenance in there, you'll always be able to remove them properly. But I was in a situation or a position where that wasn't really something I was doing at the time, and I let the rear end go unchecked, and it seized up and caused me all sorts of problems. So, but what I want to do, since I have it apart, is take some WD-40. Don't use harsh cleaners because you don't want to damage this seal around that output shaft. So WD-40 works as a pretty good cleaner. You can spray it in there and take some rags and wipe it and just do that till you get it clean. And then take some anti-seize material or compound, or even just some good waterproof grease, which is what I use, and then just coat that with some little bit of waterproof grease in there. The grease and the WD-40, neither one will harm that seal, so that's why we use that. Alright, the WD cleaned her up right nice, so when I go to put the axle in, I'll go over greasing these splines again. I'm not going to worry about it right this minute. It'll be a few minutes before we're putting axles in. Actually, it'll be the next video, but we'll get it clean and ready for reassembly. So now we could go ahead and take the tie rod loose, but since I am changing this lower arm, look how stiff that joker is with them old bushings. It's not the bushings themselves, it's just the style of bushing that was used. 15 millimeter again. Catch the washer, just slide the bolt out. Oh look, my camera app has caught it quits. Now I can't see my own view to make sure you're in the watching what I'm doing and not just listening to what I'm doing. I'll have to go in there and reset it. But everything's been in the shot, so I think we're okay right now. I don't know why it does that. It's such a pain. And it's random. It doesn't seem to be any sort of pattern to what makes it lose connection or not. Alright, we'll just wiggle the arm out of its mounting tabs. And this is going to a friend that needs high clearance lower A arms. So we'll set that aside to get ready to send it to him. And now front suspension on this side is off. So this is where the tie rod part of the video will start. We'll go ahead and talk about those and getting them removed and replaced. It's not very difficult. It's more intimidating than it seems. And now we're going to work on tie rods. I'll go ahead and take this tie rod loose from this side. Just take Mr. brake line and kind of tuck it back behind the ear on that tab there. There's a compression clamp here on the end of this boot. Usually use a little small screwdriver and pry that thing open to get it loose. Get a little small flat blade here. Don't pry the top of it apart because that won't help you get it loose. Stick it between these lower tabs or teeth on this clamp. And that's where you can actually get it loose from. Just take that off. We're not going to be reusing that. I mean, they're perfectly fine, and I like using them because they come apart, but we're going to use zip ties that came with the kit to put back on there. And even the factory's using zip ties. There's zip tie up inside where the end of this boot is. Most of the time, you can pull, yeah. Was that a rock? I think that was a rock I just knocked out of there. Hopefully that wasn't inside the steering box, but no, it wasn't. So yeah, we'll just pull to see there's the zip tie that's on there. There's the ball joint for the steering rack. You can pull on it to get it all the way out in this direction and give you more room to get to it. And then we'll just use a wrench or a large adjustable wrench to take that ball joint loose, and then the entire tie rod will come off all in one piece. I have an 1¼ inch wrench here, and that actually fits this factory one perfectly. If you don't have one, and you can use a large adjustable wrench or even a pipe wrench is fine to get these off. They're really not very tight. Tight enough, probably about 40 pounds of torque or so. But once you get it a little bit loose, then you can just roll the tie rod and it'll start to come off. Alright, now do check that the inside of these threads is nice and dry and clean, because you do want to put thread locker back on here when you reassemble it. And as you can see, I've still got thread locker in there, so there's not really anything for me to worry about, because that means it's clean and dry inside. But if it isn't, take some brake cleaner, take a rag and wrap around here to protect all of this so you're not washing grease away. But shoot some brake cleaner in there and let it blow out, clean out those threads. And these are going on the shelf with the other parts. Now in your kit, I've kind of already been playing with some of this stuff, but here's the replacement ball joint. It's nice and tight, as you can see, but it's pre-greased and everything. So we'll get that out. And then the heim joint, the jam nuts will be in here as well. And then the boots. I've already got the stuff not assembled, but set aside to the other side, ready for assembly. There's two boots and they're different sizes. The one that is physically shorter and has a larger opening goes on the driver's side. The other boot is longer and has a slightly smaller opening. But this is the driver's side boot. This is the one we're going to use on that side. Reach down in there and get the tie rod arm and linkage itself. So just once you get your parts assembled, these are the rest of the parts for it, but I'm not going to be using them just yet until I get ready to actually assemble the steering. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and get this ball joint reinstalled. Got some blue thread locker here. I always use blue. I don't really use the red. Blue seems to be enough to keep everything together. I am going to put quite a bit on here because this, in theory, should never come back off unless I end up breaking the steering rack itself. This can be a little tricky to get started with the shaft sticking at a funny angle. But yeah, just run it in by hand and go all the way up. And then of course we'll tighten it down. I had to move up to 1 5/16 inches to get ready to tighten this one. It's not a perfect fit. You can see there's some play. This is very obviously a metric size, but this it doesn't have much play, and this is a tough material. This should be good to tighten it up with, but again, just use adjustable wrench if you have one to put on here, or take a pipe wrench and even put it around this ball. This outside is a smooth surface, but it doesn't actually come in contact with anything, so you're okay to tighten it up on that outside like that if you need to. But we are going to go good and tight on it. If you got something long like this, don't put it like everything you've got into it. But do make it, really good and tight. All right, what I'm going to do now is just screw in this tie rod just a little bit and move that ball around until it's centered. That'll make putting the boot on easier. The boot will be the next thing we want to put on there. A little end of the boot right there was sucked inside of it. I just flipped it around. One thing you can do to make putting this on easier is our friend WD-40. Spray some down in it so it's inside the boot down here at the bottom to make that part slide on better. You can, even if you want, just put a little around this front surface too to make it slide up on the steering box easier. Now, WD-40 is actually good for rubber, and it conditions it, moisturizes it. Maybe kind of surprising, but I worked on copy machines for nearly a decade, and WD-40 was what we used when the rubber feed rollers that fed the paper through the machine began slipping. We would actually use WD-40 to clean the rubber rollers, and they would soften up and they would turn black again, and they would grip that paper like they were brand new. So now on this stud there is a section right here where the end of this boot is supposed to sit, and it's a little indentation that's just about the same length as that little nipple sticking out there. So that's where you want this end of the boot to rest. I'll just slide it up on that shaft and then push it into place, and there it sits right there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll get a rag and wipe that excess off, and then we'll go ahead and zip tie this end. Alright, the kit comes with zip ties, so just use those and put it right around the end of this boot and cinch it down good. Go ahead and get that as tight as you can. Of course, if you end up snapping it, you can just replace it. It's just a regular zip tie, but you do want it to be good and sealed. Trim off the excess. Now, to make that boot easier to go up on that steering rack, just come in here and crank Mr. Steering Wheel back the other way a little bit. And then just kind of twist it and push it, and it should just go right up. It's actually a rather kind of loose fit. But do make sure that it is seated properly. You do not want foreign material in that steering rack. Alright, this is the most difficult part of the tie rods is this zip tie. On both sides, but yeah. Just go ahead and get your loop started, go over the boot, and then you have to just go by feel. Again, make sure that boot is fully seated, and then make sure your zip tie is on the inside lip of that boot itself, not inside any of the ribs. And don't miss it on the outside by not having the boot pushed all the way up. Once you're sure it is on there, go ahead and get it snugged up, and then just triple and quadruple check that all this is situated properly. And then just tighten the heck out of that zip tie. I'm actually gonna take some needle nose here and just pull on that zip tie and work it back and forth and make sure it doesn't have any more room to cinch up. And then once again, just go around and check it and make sure that everything is seated. The end of that steering box has a little bit of a lip on it, so that zip tie being tight won't allow that boot to come past that lip. So as long as you get it tight enough, you'll seal it off and make sure that it doesn't come off. I'm going to cut the excess. Now I'm not going to cut it real close because I do not want to run the risk of cutting that boot. But you don't want this hanging in there either. So get that out of the way. Now all we have to do is hook up our tie rod and throw the jam nut under the old brake rotor and then drop it again on the floor and let it dance around and just play games with you. But take the jam nut and run it all the way up. And then the jam nut on the other end where the heim joint is, and run it all the way up. And then take your tie rod, leave the textured end out toward the outside so that this is where you can grip it when you want to do your toe adjustments. But go ahead and get like just one turn or so on there, and then you can start the thread on the heim joint end. And this is going to be a left-hand thread on this end, and the advantage of having that is you can now, when you turn the tie rod, it runs in and out on both ends equally. So that's it's pretty cool. Makes adjustment so much easier. On the Razor, with the Polaris factory tie rod, the only way to adjust it without having to take everything off is to loosen the jam nut and then take the pliers or adjustable wrench or something and get on the tie rod itself and turn it, which you're rolling the ball joint inside of here while you're doing it, and it only adjusts on this one end. This is just a little bit simpler and better of a method. What I'm going to do at this time, though, is run them all the way up. And you should, and as you can see, I just bottomed out here. Not quite bottomed out here, which means this still has a little bit more thread it can go. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it till it's all the way up. Just get both of them. That way, as you begin to extend it to hook to your knuckle in the steering arm, you'll know that you have the maximum amount of thread on both ends. You don't want to just run it up some in both sides and then start making your adjustments. You could have, you know, a good 3/4 of an inch of thread on this end and a 1/4 inch on this end, which would make that weaker. So start with them both bottomed out, and then when you begin your adjustment, don't run it out like this without holding this end as well, so that you get the most you can get in each end already. So, but until I'm ready to connect it, I'm going to leave it tight so that it doesn't accidentally get moved. Alrighty, and that is this tie rod. This side disassembled, tie rod installed. So what I'll do now is pause the video, and I'm going to go and do everything that I did here on the other side, and then I'll be back with you. We'll wrap this video up and get ready for part 3, which will be the front arms and the frame gusset that I haven't talked about yet, but I will when we get to that part. So I will see you in a minute. Alrighty, I got this side all tore down. I got the differential cleaned up on that output hub. I got the tie rod put in. Everything is now just like the other side when I did it before. One thing I did too is I recentered my steering wheel. Now that all the suspension has been completely disassembled, there's nothing stopping the steering rack from traveling full lock back and forth. And what I ended up with was now a full right hand turn, my steering wheel is straight up and down. A full left hand turn, steering wheel straight up and down. So I readjusted my wheel so now it's centered in both directions. When I go full lock, they straight up and then back around, straight up. So halfway point is straight up, as you guessed it. Like I said, when I was doing this before, when I checked it, it was way off. It was pointed at like 3 o'clock over there. When I did the 2 turns, there was that big a difference. So when a wheel was centered, I would get like a full rotation to lock in one direction. The other way, I'd got like 3/4 of a turn. So it was turning sharper in one direction than the other. But all that has been fixed now. Steering wheel is perfectly centered. So with the steering rack, so when all this is done and I go to set the alignment, make sure that wheel is straight, and then set my toe in, and I'll have for sure equal directions or equal turning radius on both sides. So, well, that's going to wrap up part 2. Fortunately, the rain has quit. The sun has peeked out a little bit. I got the door open now, so it turned into a pretty day after all. I did take a break for a little while, so time has passed, but it's not going to pass now. I'm ready to finish this one off, and we're going to immediately start on the arms. So for you, it'll just be a click of the next video, but for me, it's going to be about 5 minutes. So see you then.